Welcome to the second video in your legal research course. This video is about developing a basic research plan. We're going to continue with the fact scenario involving Anushka and Bala that I had outlined in the previous video. Let's plan the research into the problems thrown up by those facts. Remember, we had already reflected somewhat on the legal issues that arise from those facts. And already, we can see that the research into those issues involves looking at a variety of primary and secondary resources. To recap what we have learned from the reading material, primary sources include case law and legislation, including subordinate legislation, such as regulations. Secondary sources, on the other hand, include textbooks, articles, and legal dictionaries. Both types of sources will be available in printed form in law libraries and online. So how do we develop a research plan? We should start by thinking about a few parameters that will help us define our task with a bit more clarity. We've set out in the reading material some useful questions that will help you set the boundaries for your research. They are: 1. Why are you conducting the research? 2. How much do you already know? And 3. How much time and money do you have? Let's ask ourselves the first question. Why are you doing this research? Why has this problem come to you? I wasn't very clear on this point in the previous video. Those facts could have come to you as part of a research project in law school, or it could be a scenario that you encountered in your legal practice. But in either case, the reason you are doing the research is to come up with good advice that you can give at least one of the parties, that is either Bala or Anushka or line credit. Knowing who we have to advise will give us more clarity about the research task. The second question, how much do you already know? That's a question that all of you need to answer for yourselves. But let's assume that we don't know very much, because that will give us the broadest scope for our plan. The final question, how much time and money do you have? Again, that will be dictated by the situation. If this is a research project, then you have a bit more time and money is not really an issue. If it comes to you in practice, it is quite possible that you may not have more than a day or two before you need to come up with at least some preliminary advice for your client. And you might not have a great deal of money to spend, because your client might just be giving you a small fee to get some advice on the problem. So think about those parameters whenever you are deciding how you're going to go about your research. Now, let's go through some of the basic steps that would form our research plan. Remember, our assumption here is that we know very little about the legal issues. So as the first step, do some background reading. Remember, in the last video, during our analysis of the facts, we had identified the two general areas of law associated with the problem. They were contract law and consumer protection law. So as a first step, go to a secondary source, such as a textbook, to do some general reading on these two areas. Perhaps you could also find some basic information online in a database or in a basic article. The purpose of this step of the process is not to get all the answers, but to figure out where to go next. It's a bit like entering a strange dark room. It really helps to first turn the lights on. The background reading will help you figure out which primary sources of law that you need to approach in order to get further in your research task. So with a bit of background reading in contract law and consumer protection law, you will be pointed towards the principal statutes in these two areas of law. You are likely to come across the Contract Act, the Sale of Goods Act, and the Consumer Protection Act. So background reading done, what's the next step? Remember, that our analysis of the scenario in the last video has already thrown up a set of issues. Your next task, obviously, would be to find the specific sections of these statutes that apply to the legal issues that you had identified. This requires you to read the legislation, keeping in mind the issues that we have identified. For example, one of the issues that we have identified is whether Bala has any claim against Ram and Sons. If you go back to the facts, you will remember that at the time of purchase, Bala had been told that the ring was something, and later they discovered that it was something else, something of much lower value. The task before you is to frame this issue in terms of the applicable law. So read the legislation with that in mind, and you will come across specific sections that apply to this issue. Now, with this in mind, read the Sale of Goods Act and the Consumer Protection Act. You will find the sections that apply to the issue of a person who purchases something that later turned out to not fit the description of the goods at the time of purchase. Do the same with all the issues that we have identified. As a result, you will have a bunch of sections that apply to the various issues that this problem has thrown up. And since you have read these statutes, you will also have a good idea of how these sections work together and apply to these facts. The next thing you need to do is find some case law that deals with the particular sections of the Act that you think are relevant. In a case like this, and with such commonly used legislation, there will be cases of law that deal almost exactly with the kind of issues that you have identified. For example, on the issue of Bala and Anushka being told at Ram and Sons that the ring was of a particular value, your reading of the Sale of Goods Act will show that there are specific sections that deal with sale by description. Your task now would be to find the cases that help you understand and interpret the sections on sale by description. Now there is a fourth step. Most of the time, especially early on as a law student or a legal professional, you may find that even after identifying the applicable statutory law and reading the cases to understand the statutes, you are still not completely sure of how the law works in this scenario. For instance, you may have trouble understanding the language of the statute and the way it has been explained. This is when you should go back to the secondary sources we had approached in the start of your research for general reading purposes. Now, however, your purpose is different. While you were previously reading those textbooks and journal articles to gain a general understanding of an area of law, you are now looking for specific answers to clear up any doubts about how the law works. You may even come across articles that deal with the specific questions you are now looking for answers for. So this is a general research plan that you can use for any research task. Start with the secondary sources for a general understanding of the area. Then once you know the main statutes in the area, read them to identify the specific sections that apply to the issues you have identified. Then read the judgments that will help you understand these sections. And finally, go back to the secondary sources for more specific reading. Thank you for watching. In the next video, we will learn in greater detail about one of these steps. We are going to learn how to read legislation.